Hello boys and girls, really I'm going to keep this one as short as I can. I always say I'll keep it short and then it just goes on for ages. This one's about confusing Asperger syndrome with narcissism, and this happens quite frequently, and people have even said, oh, they seem to cluster in the same sort of personality traits. If you want to know more about autism and particularly Asperger syndrome, I suggest you go and look it up online. There's a ton of information out there. The first thing to say is, and the most important thing to say, and I'm not going to dwell on giving a synopsis of all the conditions, are that people who suffer from Asperger syndrome typically have difficulty with social interaction, particularly understanding meta-communication, social context, and therefore they struggle sometimes with empathy and with compassion, not because they don't want to understand other people, but because they find the ambiguity of other people's communication, or they seem to find the ambiguity of other people's communication, particularly emotionally rooted communication, overwhelming, confusing and bewildering. People with Asperger syndrome also typically have a particular interest. They might be workaholics, they might be highly technical, very work focused, very focused on routines and doing the same thing over and over again because they tend to find that reassuring. And finally, sometimes you can have sensory issues. Some people with Asperger syndrome really do not like to be touched. Some people with Asperger syndrome really are very sensitive to loud noises, especially when they're trying to think or make conversation. The two guys that I've known for the longest time and had the most prolonged contact with, both had difficulty with touch and both had difficulty with noise. So both of these guys, one guy I lived with, I shared a flat with him, he wasn't diagnosed Asperger syndrome, he was diagnosed as a mild form of autism. But when I discussed it with him and we looked at the different symptoms, it did sound more like Asperger syndrome. Another guy that I didn't live with him, but I worked with him very closely for 8 months, and I lived over the road from him, so I would spend upwards of 7 or 8 hours a day with him. Now, why does it look like narcissism? Sometimes they seem indifferent, and that indifference can seem to be abusive, arrogance, haughtiness. Very often they'll say things that will really drive people crazy, and it'll seem like they're being it can seem like people with Asperger syndrome being deliberately rude, very arrogant at times, hyper competitive and deliberately insulting. However, that's not the case. I spoke to somebody recently who said that she felt that her boyfriend suffered from narcissism. So let's talk now about distinguishing Asperger syndrome, misdiagnosing Asperger syndrome as narcissism, particularly in relationships. Asperger syndrome affects all autism affects more men than it affects women. They don't know why. Research is still ongoing. Is it genetic? Is it environmental? You can have that whole nature-nurture debate there. A client spoke to me recently and said, oh, I believe that my on-again, off-again boyfriend is suffering from narcissistic personality disorder. So when people say that to me, I've whittled it down to 3 major things that I look for. And you've got to bear in mind that every different person, psychotherapist, researcher takes a slightly different view. I'm really only interested in abusive, malignant narcissism. I don't benign narcissism where a person is just vain and self-obsessed. It's neither. It doesn't interest me because it shouldn't really have massive painful consequences to the people around them. The things that I look for, the three things that I particularly look for when it's malignant abusive narcissism, one is a 0 level of compassion, like no empathy whatsoever. Another thing is needing to put other people down in order to feel good. And the third thing is being in love with a grandiose, fantasized image of the self. Now, obviously, most of the people watching this channel will be aware that there are other elements of narcissism, but I think these are the 3 that identify the most abusive and malignant types of narcissists. Another reason for making this video is not just that I know several people have had this problem and they struggle to tell the difference, but I've also noticed, perhaps a bit of a witch hunt sort of a feel for the narcissist. People are seeing narcissism everywhere. I've looked at other people's work on psychopaths and psychopathology, and I see the same thing, a tendency to see psychopaths around every corner. And if the people who are studying narcissism, if they happen to fall out with somebody else, or if they happen to fall out with me, the 9 times out of 10, the first thing that they go to is, oh, you're a narcissist. You're talking about narcissism, but that's because you are a narcissist. And I'm like, well, according to my definitions, it can't really, I might have some problems, I certainly do, but that isn't malignant narcissism. You know, in order for, okay, malignant narcissism requires abuse. But for it to be true narcissism, there has to be no self-awareness and no possibility that the person could be a narcissist. So when you get people who are self-proclaimed, oh, you see it on forums, on psychology forums, I'm a narcissist, come and talk to me about narcissism, I have no feelings for anybody. It's like, come on, dude, you know, you're playing, it's a role play. They're not being really honest with you. No true narcissist would sit there and go, when I did that, was I being abusive? Am I a narcissist? You'll have narcissistic traits. Everybody has narcissistic traits, but that doesn't make you a malignant, abusive narcissist. So in both the cases where I had prolonged exposure, either through living with or working with people with Asperger syndrome, I was also in contact with the girlfriend. And so this client, when she came to me and said, oh, I think my boyfriend's a narcissist, this is what he does, and I asked him the 3 questions, and she said, no, he doesn't lack empathy, he doesn't obsessively, he can seem indifferent, but he doesn't really truly lack compassion if you push him on it. So is he in love with a you know, a fantasized image of himself? Well, he's grandiose, but you know, he also has self-deprecation. I think he's aware. No, I don't think that's true. And I said, does he obsessively need to put other people down in order to feel good? And she said, no. He can be negative, he can be bitchy, but he doesn't need to put other people down to feel good. And I said, well, it's probably not narcissism. What are the common complaints? The common complaints that I've heard from girls whose boyfriends are somewhere on this scale for Asperger syndrome are, he doesn't care, he doesn't show that he cares, he can be very cruel. The apparent cruelty is not rooted in a desire. Like a narcissist would be like, I have to put you down to feel good, and I drink your pain like milkshake, I drink it up. But that's not what somebody with Asperger syndrome is doing. If they're cruel to you and they're indifferent to you, it could be stress, it could be a stress response. If you're asking them for something and they don't know what you're asking for because they don't have that, perhaps that social, the part of the brain that deals with meta-communication, that deals with social interaction, that deals with knowing what people want, maybe it isn't functioning that highly at that point for them in their lives, that you're just sending them bewildering signals. They know you want something, but they don't really know what it is. And what that does, this is a warning, I guess I would say, to girls who are in relationships with guys who they suspect might have Asperger syndrome, is it's going to register as stress. So you'll be hearing a guy say to you, hey girls, you're stressing him out, leave him alone. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that in this situation, with no moral, there's no morality to this, there's no cheap moralization. I'm not going to moralize and say people who suffer from Asperger syndrome are bad guys who don't care about their girlfriends. There is a lack of understanding of meta-communication, of body language, and there is a lack of understanding other people's needs. But here's another great difference between people with Asperger syndrome and narcissism. People who suffer from Asperger syndrome are capable of huge acts of kindness that is genuinely rooted in a desire to be kind. They are also, secondly, fully prepared to talk about their condition, because it's, in my experience so far, it's just another technical sort of interesting thing to look at and go, oh yeah, isn't that interesting that you need to do this and you need to do that. There was one guy who I spoke to who was a little further along the autism spectrum with the Asperger syndrome. Really, he could go out and about and do things in the world, and he would turn up. It was a psychology meeting I used to go to a few years ago, and I met him a few times, and what he told me was he studied people like things. He needed to do that. Like, I don't want to upset people with this video and have people go, like you're crazy with me over what I'm saying here. I'm not provoking you. I'm relating back somebody else's reality tunnel, and it's not good enough for us as adults to just knee-jerk emotionally react because this is how we feel. Look at it from the other person's point of view. This guy had to study people like things to even hold a conversation. And he had apparently done a lot of progress in his life, but as he was talking to me, he was doing this, and he couldn't look at me. And he said, for me to he said, I know that this is odd to you. He says, I know that this is odd to you, but I can't look at you. But 4 or 5 years ago, I couldn't even do this. And I was like, well, how did you even train yourself to be able to do this? This is obviously stressful. And he said, yeah, this is really tiring. He said, I'll go home after this and I'll go to sleep because of the noise. People would talk, like 4 people would ask him questions at the same time, and he just was stressed out with it. And he said that basically every impulse he had in social interaction, he did the opposite. and that's how he trained himself to talk to people. Interestingly enough, he actually he had certain skills that he developed. Like, he'd self-taught to play the piano by ear, and you could hum any tune and he could play there's videos of him out there. There's an amazing piano player, completely self-taught. The other thing he got into was dream psychology, and actually he'd studied dream psychology inside and out, and you could ask him the meaning of any dream, and he'd really gotten into that. So here's a kind of a warning to you though. There is a limit to how far somebody with Asperger syndrome can really go with empathy and with compassion. If you truly think you're with somebody who has Asperger syndrome, you can discuss it with them. They're not narcissists. They won't be like, I'm perfect, don't discuss that. They'll go, oh yeah, maybe I do. In my experience, there's a very down-to-earth approach of like, oh, maybe I do, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, I can only speak for the 3 people that I've had contact with. But in my experience, it was a very matter-of-fact conversation. This is my condition, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. That means you can negotiate. You know, I'm particularly thinking of girls in relationships with guys who might have a touch of Asperger syndrome, where you could actually have the direct communication of, I need you to do this, this and this in order for me to feel like you care. The consistent interaction that I see is the girl and the guy complaining to me. The girl says he's not showing me enough love, and the guy says, I don't know what this girl wants from me. So I'm saying to the girl, please be patient with him. He doesn't understand the way everybody else does. Like, he thinks he is showing you love. He thinks that he's done everything he needs to do. And you're intimating and suggesting that you want certain things, and he doesn't get that. He's not being stubborn, but you're meta-communication, trying to get your way via body language, isn't going to work. You've got to be really specific. This is what I need from you. Now, you say that to some girls, and they would say, I'm not doing that. It's not romantic. I need a man who's going to X, Y, and that's, you know, whatever. That's no morality here. I'm not going to moralize. This video would be 5 times as long and 10 times as dull if we got into moralizing. It's just a system, and this is how it works. One person has a set of needs, the other person has a set of things they can deliver, and vice versa. The guy has needs, unfortunately, and this is what provokes and upsets girls when I'm talking to them about this. Is the other aspect is, it doesn't just seem like narcissism, it seems like typical guy problems, because the guy wants more space, the guy wants more silence, the guy wants more quiet, and that is not just him being a guy and being a dick, like, shut up woman, you're stressing me out. That's him at peace. If the guy has Asperger syndrome, I'm generalizing again, then the peace comes from routine. The peace comes through my ability to do something that I know I'm good at, and it will tend to be quite procedural and mechanistic. The good news is, if you're prepared to enter that reality, as I did, I had needs. I'm fairly fucking emotional, feminine style of communication, as you can tell. I like talking, and I like talking about emotion and psychology. So when I'm talking to guys with Asperger syndrome, I have to get in their reality tunnel. I can't just expect them to come into mine. That's not fair. I've got to go to their reality tunnel. Guys with Asperger syndrome, another good thing is there usually be something that they are passionate about, and if you can meet them on that level, then you will get a high level of interaction, you will get a high level of openness. But I guess I'll start wrapping it up now. There's the differences. Asperger syndrome, yes, it can look like a lack of empathy. And yes, perhaps even sometimes it is a lack of empathy in the moment. But if you explain it in a way that is clear, like when you speak to me like this, or when you ignore me, the ignoring thing is big. So imagine I'm going out with a girl, say, and she's just very technically minded, and she's not an emotional communicator, and I'm very flirtatious as a guy. And I'm not getting flirtation back. She's not doing the cute little texts and the WhatsApps and the smiley faces and the kisses and stuff. She's not particularly huggy. She does love me. This is the other thing that I would say would be a difference, is people with Asperger syndrome are perfectly capable of emotion. People with narcissism will fake emotion to get what they want if they are truly a narcissist. And there is no remorse. But for people with Asperger syndrome, there is remorse. They're genuinely sorry. They're kind of bewildered at the same time. Like, the common complaint from the guy will be, I don't know what all this emotion stuff is, it's annoying and it's tiring. The common complaint from the girl, because as I say, most people with Asperger syndrome are male, and my experiences, it was all males, and I had communication in 2 of the cases with the girls, is he's not giving me enough emotion. probably won't really be able to. You'll be able to get communication, you'll be able to get a more technical approach to the relationship, but you're not, if you're looking to be smothered in love, it's less likely to happen. The people with Asperger syndrome can do it if it's pre-thought, and they have a rule, and they go, I need to communicate with this child in this way because I'm frightening the child. I need to communicate with my wife in this way to show her love. Because of course they feel love, of course they don't want to be isolated, of course they don't want to upset people, but they do. And I'm using the word they here. I'm the only person I know that has managed to live with or work with in a long-term scenario, two different people, both with Asperger syndrome. And my sympathy is heavily with people with Asperger syndrome, I think, because maybe, even though I have this more emotional, extroverted style of communication, I understand where that's coming from. I understand where that sort of a mindset is coming from, where the sensitivity to being touched, the sensitivity to noise, the misunderstanding of meta-communication. I had experienced that in my early teens, and it's one of the things that drove me to study psychology. And I will not lie to you, I studied people like things, and even to this day sometimes I refer to people in like, humans do this, humans do that, and when I'm writing I do that, humans do this, humans do that, and then I'm like, oh no, you mean we, you don't mean you don't mean they, you mean us. It's like, oh yeah, okay. So there is that kind of more technically minded side to myself that gives me this, it's not out of compassion, it's not like a sense of, oh, they need help, I should be nice. It's not that, it's actually that I quite enjoy, there's a natural gelling with people who are Asperger syndrome sufferers. A lot of my client base, even on the Street Fight Secrets channel, on the martial arts channel, are people who suffer from Asperger syndrome. So if you think that you're facing somebody who might have Asperger syndrome, I suggest you go and study it. I suggest you go and look it up. There are certain clues, the love of routines, the unusually high desire to be left alone to do their work, which is more than you would see with the because I think every guy has that to a degree. The lack of affection that can sometimes be there, but please don't conflate it with a desire to abuse you and put you down to make themselves feel good. They do not operate that way. It's not, there's no morality here. It's not that they're good people. Aspergers are always good people. Asperger people can make dick decisions. I've seen it happen, even criminal decisions. I've seen that happen as well. Humans, same as anybody else, can make those kinds of decisions. But it's not coming from a place of, I need you to feel bad so I can feel good. But sometimes it can look like that. So I guess it's just one to look out for. Sorry if that was a bit rambling. And you know, I don't make these videos to provoke people. I don't make these videos to upset people. I am, you know, sometimes I feel like I've got to start waving a white flag in the videos, going, come in peace, man. And I can only tell you what I know. I'm not an expert on Asperger syndrome. I only, you know what I know through what I've read in the research and through what I've experienced. And as Korzybski would say, the map is not the territory. So in that spirit and in that light, please be patient with me. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I'll speak to you again soon.